In the meantime, let me just do an acknowledgement and welcome to country, even though we have a beautiful slide that will come up for you that you can read our beautiful words. Here, oh, here it is here. So Aboriginal people have always had a kind of acknowledgement and welcome to country. You can read this for yourselves, but just let me add that there's been a lot of conversations around why we actually have to have a welcome to country, and it's so that we can keep you safe on country. The other thing is around acknowledgement of countries, acknowledgement of community. And we acknowledge each other, especially as women, because we believe that the earth is our mother and she knows all our footprints, and we are all welcome here. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Auntie Kerry. That's beautiful. Nadia, we thought we'd just start while you rebooted. So I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, and apologies for that. It was just unbelievable timing to have that happen just as we were about to start. So thank you so much for getting this started. And thank you everyone for joining us today on to explore this topic around funding and thinking about funding in a more diversified way. So my name's Associate Professor Nadia Corsini. I'm from Adelaide University, and I'm joined today by Associate Professor Auntie Kerry Doyle and Professor Auntie Kerry Doyle and Associate Professor Michelle Peat to explore this topic through a conversation. And so thank you very much to the panelists for sharing your knowledge with us today. Just a reminder at the end of today's presentation to complete the very short evaluation survey. It really helps with developing future webinars in this series. So to begin, this is an overview of today's presentation. I'm going to briefly explain the thinking and inspiration behind this particular topic. I'll then talk about the types of funding in Australia and explain the categories that you hear a lot about. We will then move to a Q&A session with Professor Kerry Doyle and Associate Professor Michelle Peat. And at the end, I'll attempt to wrap up and summarise the key messages from the conversation and open it up to questions, time permitting. Okay, so why this particular topic? I've noticed over the last few years, but in particular recently, funding is a particular source of worry for many EMCRs. Funding is becoming more and more competitive and difficult to attain. And so it's understandable that this is a source of concern and stress for many EMCRs. I've also been hearing a lot that Category 1 success, Category 1 grants are associated with success, or the idea of success, or having made it, or having achieved success for EMCRs. And that's, of course, also understandable, but perhaps there is a opportunity to think about other types of funding that may be available, that are available, and could be considered as part of a portfolio or strategy when thinking about your research career. There are many paths to success as a researcher. It's not impossible, but highly unlikely that a researcher will sustain a career with only Category 1 funding. Ultimately, over the course of a career, different sources of funding will be required to sustain your own funding, as well as build a team to progress a particular area of work or portfolio of work. And so the aim of today's conversation is to have an honest discussion about funding that includes Category 1 funding. Of course, that's a major source of prestigious funding in Australia, but also talks about other types of funding that you might want to think about and that other people have been able to successfully obtain to support a research career over a long period of time. Next slide, please, Linda. Thank you. I won't spend a lot of time talking about funding in Australia because it's quite complicated, but essentially there are 4 categories of funding, and this is based on the HRTC framework that you may have heard about. This framework influences funding that universities receive. Again, I won't go into the complexities around the funding, but there are 4 main categories of funding. Category 1 is the one that we hear a lot about. Category 1 refers to Australian competitive grants. So they include, for example, your Australian Research Council grants, or ARC, MRFF, Medical Research Future Fund, and NHMRC grants. So they are in one category, and they are Australian competitive grants. Category 2 includes all other public sector funding, and that includes local, state, and Commonwealth bodies that administer funding or that provide funding that is not awarded under Category 1. Category 3 refers to funding from other non-profit, contract, international, or philanthropic sources. And Category 4 funding is funding for cooperative research centres. Category 1 funding receives a lot of attention because it is prestigious funding, and universities receive funding based on researchers being awarded Category 1 grants. So it's linked to the reputation of universities, and that's why there is a lot of focus on Category 1 funding in particular. However, over time, there has been an increase in the proportion of funding that researchers and universities receive from Category 2, Category 3, and Category 4 grants. So perhaps there is often a view that Category 1 funding is the main goal, or should be the main goal, whereas in reality there are other sources of funding that sustain many research teams across universities across Australia. And Category 2 to 4 funding is a major and growing proportion of funding for universities. Depending on your particular project or objective, different grants are suitable for different purposes. Some grants, such as Category 1 grants, can support fellowships, whereas other grants can be very suitable for particular, a project-based focused. There's also grants that are more suitable for projects that are investigator-driven, and there are other grants that lend themselves to contract work. So it's not necessarily work that you are driving, but work that where you are using your research skills to support the aims and objectives of another organisation or entity. And all these types of grants can be valuable for you. A combination of investigator-led activity as well as project-based or contract work can be applicable over the course of a career at different times. So I'd now like to talk with Auntie Kerry and Michelle about their experiences. So before I do that, I'll tell you a little bit about our esteemed panellists. So Professor Auntie Kerry Doyle is the Associate Head of School of Indigenous Health and Professor in Medicine at Charles Sturt University. A Budjeri Cadigal Irish woman, Professor Doyle was one of the first Indigenous women to graduate from Oxford University. She's also the chair and research lead of the Aboriginal Health and Wellbeing Clinical Academic Group at Murray-Dulu, Budjeri, Goodamul, the Sydney Partnership for Health, Education, Research and Enterprise, so SPHERE, member of the Council of Elders for the Congress of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Nurses and Midwives, Katsanam, and board member for the Nagamura Aboriginal, Maori and Pacific Islander Corporation. Professor Doyle has spent her career dedicated to improving outcomes for Australia's Indigenous population. Her research interests include education, promoting applied cultural proficiency research, social determinants of health and Indigenous health. And she's published extensively and presented papers nationally and internationally and co-authored many books and chapters on Indigenous topics. So very excited to hear about your experiences in relation to funding, Auntie Kerry. And Associate Professor Michelle Peat is the program leader for the Psychosocial Health and Wellbeing Research Unit, Empower, based at the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, University of Melbourne. Michelle oversees several research projects in psychology, cancer and reproductive health. Her main goals involve the development of resources for people and their evaluation through prospective multi-centre psycho-oncology studies. Her research portfolio has involved the development and implementation of patient resources, including a fertility-related decision aid for young women with early breast cancer and a booklet on breast cancer and early menopause. Her work is also internationally and nationally recognised, resulting in a number of awards and recognition throughout Australia. And her current projects include the development of fertility decision aids for young women with early breast cancer and endometrial cancer, for parents of children with cancer, and for women considering elective egg freezing. So a lot of experience between our two panelists. So I'll start with you, Michelle. What types of funding have you sought over your career?
Thanks, Nadia. Look, I'm going to say I'm quite opportunistic. So it's basically anything I felt I'm eligible for. It's kind of the approach I've had. I guess what that means is, particularly earlier in my career, I would apply for lots of small grants. University grants were often good. Seed grants from different organizations. I guess a lot of the funding over my career has really been perhaps as category 2 funding opportunities as well as internal opportunities. So we did some work around heavy menstrual bleeding, and we got money from Endometriosis Australia. It was a very small grant, but it gave us some pilot data that we could use and build upon. Similarly, our university has sort of innovation grants where they're, again, small pots of money, $10,000, $20,000 you apply for, but it helps gives you that preliminary data to then apply for larger pots of money. Even now, I still apply for these small grants as well as putting in applications for bigger grants. I apply for travel grants. Obviously, as an academic, fellowships are really important. So I guess it kind of comes back to that title, really diverse, and finding opportunities where you can to try and keep, whether it's keeping myself funded or to fund the research that I'm doing. I think that, yeah, so really, really all over the place, to be honest. I don't know, Auntie Kerry, do you have anything to add to that?
I agree that you have to look at something that you're interested in. And I've had quite a few different areas really of looking at stuff. Like I do a lot of work with Bill Gates Foundation because I don't know anymore, but just saying. But it's good also to look at those big international grants because they're really keen to fund issues in Australia that don't often get funded. So I'm lucky that I was interested in Indigenous health, did a lot in that, interested in eating disorders, got money for that. I've had a couple of MRFFs for stuff that I wanted to do clinically. So I think you're right. I think to keep an open mind, and don't worry how much the money is. Worry about how much you're going to enjoy doing it. Because I will still do something for $5,000 if I think I've got nothing to do that weekend. So let's do that. I think you're allowed to do what makes you happy rather than worrying about your career, because that will come.
And I think effort's proportionate to size of grant in my experience as well. So sort of to your point, Auntie Kerry, like I feel the smaller grants you can often pull together a lot more quickly, and they can give you sort of a board to jump off, like in terms of going up the ladder or whatever. Terrible analogy, but you know what I mean. So you have to start somewhere, and you have to start.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes, just to preempt the next question, is sometimes you can spend a whole lot of time writing up a grant, etc., and then people go, yeah, nah. And I've reviewed a lot of grants for funding organisations, and I know sometimes when somebody has just sort of massaged a grant to make it fit the requirements of that particular funding source. So that's one thing to be careful of. But the second thing is, if you've already got something going like that and you didn't get funding, then don't worry about it. Keep it and fix it up for the next thing that you want to put in around that same topic. So don't consider getting knocked back as a failure, because I can't remember the statistics, but something like 12% get through with the big grants, and the rest of the people, have to go to the pub on Friday and make themselves feel better. Well, I don't go to the pub. I'm not suggesting that, but maybe yeah.
It actually makes me think. So one of my prior roles was as a research project manager I was a clinical trials manager for a psycho-oncology cooperative research group in Australia. And I mean, this was many years ago, but we did do an analysis of the grant applications that were submitted, and found that on average, it was grants got awarded third or fourth time they'd been resubmitted. So that's something to keep in mind, sort of like Auntie Kerry's point of sort of, if you don't get it once, it doesn't mean you throw the grant application away. And these were looking at competitive Category 1 grants, but the idea being that sometimes you do need to rework it, have another year of preliminary data that you develop for that project or whatever, to get it to that point where it is competitive for these very competitive schemes. So yeah, definitely. I mean, I did a thing several years ago. I think I was a bit depressed about not being successful. And I went, okay, if we're talking about success rates being 10%, if I'm getting at least 10% or higher success, and I just did this on a number of grants, I included my small grants, then I'm doing okay. And that should be something I pat myself on the back for.
Well done. That's true.
That's a great way of thinking about it, Michelle, because it's so true. I mean, that's the reality. The success rate is not high because there isn't always enough funding to go around, or there isn't enough funding to go around. Can either of you talk us through a recent example where you had a grant and you had to make a decision on a grant? So you've talked about that it's not necessarily the size of the grant that dictates whether you think it's a good opportunity. What decision making do you go through to, can you give a recent example that's fresh in your mind where something came across your desk and you had to make a decision about whether it was going to be worth your while? Are you able to share what that thinking or decision-making process looks like for you?
I guess an obvious one might be, so in the last year, my goal was to try and get funding for my position. And so there's a lot of decisions about which sort of fellowship applications you apply for. And obviously the ideal one being an investigator grant through NHMRC, that the schemes that I was looking at, versus different ones. And there was a bit of a weighing up of investment of time versus chance of success for some of these. So, you know, for example, the investigator grants, I find they're very time intensive to prepare and write. And I was applying at a level which I was like, oh, do I really think I'll be competitive at this level now because of, you know, the criteria? So then I kind of went, okay, maybe if I don't think I'm competitive based on who previous awardees are, what's a better opportunity for me in terms of getting funding for my role? So that would be things like I'm probably better off applying for an ideas grant or fellowships from category 2 funding pots, and things like that in terms of time and investment versus, you know, a leadership grant, which I may not even, you know, get high enough a score. So yeah, so I guess there is a bit of decision making about that. I talked to a lot of people, a lot of my senior colleagues, and asked for advice, and basically took that on board and went, okay, maybe it is better for me to apply for these other things, and also try and save some time or protect some time to really focus on outcomes that are going to make me competitive for that category 1 grant in future.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that was probably the most recent one. And I feel that happens almost with every grant. There's a little bit of, is it worth the effort? What's the likelihood I'm going to get it? Am I better off investing my time in something else? And always just keeping your eye on the prize in the sense of what is my actual long-term goal here? And because you can actually spend a whole year writing grants and do nothing else, right? If that's what you did. So there does have to be a bit of a juggling act, I think.
Auntie Kerry, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I always look to see what the outcomes are going to be and how I'm going to translate that knowledge. That's one thing. The second thing I always look at is who in my team or who do I know that I can put forward in this grant that's going to help them professionally or personally or careerically. That might not be a word, but if it's not, it should be. So, for example, there was a recent one that I thought this is going to be really great, and I gathered this wonderful team of Indigenous kinship carer mob, another mob for Indigenous suicide prevention and mental health in young people. I got 2 really big AMSs and LHDs, and I'm thinking, we're in, this is my money, I'm going to have a party already. And then the main psychiatrist went, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. And so it sort of fell apart. So I thought to myself, well, that's just pretty much rubbish. But then you've still got this team, you've still got people who want to work in this area. And I am confident that it would have gotten up, but we did need that pivotal person. And sometimes that just happens. Sometimes the best laid plans of mice and women and female mice just don't work out, and you can't go, well, that's horrible, I'm never going to work or look at that again. You just have to go, breathe in, breathe out, move on. It's okay.
Thank you. Move on to the next question, and I might start with you because it's a good segue about, have you pursued a funding source that didn't work out?
Me?
Yes, Auntie.
Oh, every one. Every one of those ones we've pursued and didn't work out. And sometimes for really good reasons. You know, you think, well, when you find out who got the funding, you think, gee, that's really good. And sometimes for reasons you can't figure out. And when you look at how something is assessed, and you know that like somebody else might have had one more publication that looked better than yours, then it's hard to go, oh well, fair enough, I'll just sit back down. So it just happens, you know, like you're never going to be successful at everything you do. And again, if you've got that 10%, like Michelle was saying, well done you. If you get one grant in your whole life, I'm still going to be proud of you. You know, you have contributed to the found of knowledge in Australia, and that's a great thing. Well done.
Michelle, what about you? Is there a funding source that you pursued for longer than perhaps, you know, in hindsight, you felt you should have, or that didn't work out for you?
You know, well, I guess you kind of go into it with the expectation that there are going to be things that grants that don't work out, right? I never say never. I think sometimes it is about, there's a little, we all know there's a bit of gamesmanship in writing grants. And so part of it, I think, is it learning how to write it the right way for different funding sources. And maybe I haven't quite figured that out yet. So it is worth reapplying. Or again, it's about, like Auntie Kerry says, normally when you get your feedback, sometimes it's really clear and you're like, okay, yeah, I need more preliminary data. I need to do this. I need to do that. I don't have the right team, whatever it might be. Other times you don't know. And I think then it's about the scheme and how important, like what they value and what they're looking for. I did have a mentor say to me once, she goes, when you review grant, and Auntie Kerry, you might be able to give insight into this. She goes, there's some grants you read, you're like, yeah, 100%, we got to fund it. Some applications you read, you're like, yeah, nah, not ready yet. And then a lot of the in-between is a little bit of serendipity. It depends on who's reading it, who's reviewing it, what the current trends are, what the goals are of the funding scheme. And she goes, there in our field, there are a lot of very worthy grants that are worth funding, but because of the limited amount of money, there is a little bit of luck in there. So I guess I always just keep that in mind and go that because of that, I would never just stop pursuing a funding source. I think it just might be about finding the right fit.
Yes.
Yeah, rather than necessarily. But that said, I would say I probably go into it. I'm not going to apply for a grant that definitely I don't fit in. So, yeah, I can't think of a funding source in general which I'd go, I've tried, then give up. What I will say though, across most my career, most of how I've been funded has been, I think I sort of said earlier, is Category 2 grants. So I guess that's a worthwhile investment in those efforts. I still apply for Category 1 and have had some, but I guess it's about, again, kind of knowing where you're going to have greater success and focusing on that, but not to take the other ones out, because hey, we all want those Category 1 grants.
Yes. Can you talk about, Michelle, if you want to take this next question first, is there a example fresh in your mind about a time when you had to pivot? You had a particular strategy and realized that, no, I'm going to change here. I'm going to change tact and look at a different funding source or a different way of seeing that particular research that you were trying to pursue?
We're always sort of pivoting. And again, because depending on what the calls are for funding, so my work is largely, I guess I would say my work is largely reproductive decision-making. How do women make decisions about their health, whether it's fertility, menopause, menstrual health? So I know I have this kind of broad idea of what I want to do, the kind of projects I want to do. And then depending on what schemes come out, there might be a little bit of pivoting going, oh, it doesn't quite fit, but I wonder if there's something I can do that will fit for this. So there's that kind of pivot. There's also, I think, from a career trajectory perspective, recently, there's been a bit of a pivot where at the start I was like, my expertise was in one area, right? So I did the fertility decision-making in breast cancer, and that was it. And that was really my focus. And then as I've progressed, I've kind of broadened my scope, and it has required me to sort of pivot in terms of how I think of myself as a researcher and what I bring to the table.
Yes.
And I'm still trying to figure that out. But, I'm like, now I'm positioning myself very much as a decision scientist. So what are my expertise is in how do we explore, understand, help people make treatment decisions. And it's not specifically about the area or the patient population now. It's more about this broader conceptual thing and sort of selling myself in that. So I'd probably say that's probably my biggest pivot. Now, how does that apply to diverse funding and funding sources? Well, I think, again, it depends on what you're applying for. So grants I'm applying, I guess that probably fits more in a fellowship concept. So for the last few years, I have had lots of different changes for my knowledge gain section of my fellowship applications. Again, trying to sort of fit to scheme and trying to see how, trying to figure out how it all fits in and stuff, given that we are applying for specific schemes and not general, this is who you are, I'm going to fund you for most of these applications. So I kind of feel like I'm constantly pivoting a little bit. with
Yes.
every application I put in, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. What about you, Auntie Kerry, over your career? How when have you had to pivot, or is it a similar experience where you really always thinking about how you position yourself and position your research? What's your experience?
I don't know if it's pivoting, but if it's just growing or leaning into whatever the circumstances are. So I would look at it more like that than you don't have to be wedded to one particular standpoint. You're allowed to grow and change as you learn and experience more things. You might join a few more teams, etc. So, that's a better way to be kinder to yourself, I think.
I like that way of thinking of it because that's what it feels like. It does feel like it's growth. It doesn't feel like I've changed who I am or what I'm doing. I certainly think it does feel like growth and expanding.
Lovely. So what advice do you have for EMCRs navigating funding now, this year and beyond? What's your top tip?
Top tip. Oh,
You can go, Auntie Kerry, if you've got a top tip ready.
You know what? Just from what I've been noticing lately, looking and reviewing grants, is to build your team. So if you're not leading a team, then you're still going to be part of a team. Very few people just get grants as single entities in the world. So, and one of the things that I've been looking at recently is when you want to do clinical trials, I have everybody in the team do a clinical trials education program, whichever one that you choose, and Michelle will know more than that. If you want to work in communities, then I organise for anybody who is working in community to have some research training. So that doesn't mean they have to go to university. It means you can do a certificate that you've written somewhere or somehow, something like that. So that when people read your application, they know that you're there to grow that whole team and certainly have knowledge translation, understand how you're going to do that right from the get-go. But still, if you want to do the smaller grants, like are good for looking at getting good literature reviews ready, all of those sorts of things. So my bottom line advice is believe in yourself, get a good team, have a go, and finally eat a lot of cake because that helps. Oh, good.
You have permission to eat cake.
I like that. I like that.
Michelle, what would be your top tip?
So I guess mine would be, I consider myself to be a mid-career researcher. Mine would be, again, don't rely on just one source of funding. Agree with Auntie Kerry, have a go. If you think you've got a chance, you might as well go for it. Get lots of advice. There's not really one tip, is that get lots of advice from the people around you who have experience and feedback. I actually think feedback is really important. Lots of different types of feedback on your application. I think sometimes I struggle a lot when you're trying to sell yourself in these applications. It makes me very uncomfortable. I think it makes a lot of us very uncomfortable. So it's actually good to have other parties kind of go, here, you're underselling yourself here. Like, you can do this better. And I guess think about projects as something that you build. So you start small, you can work bigger on them. And maybe my last thought is make sure you protect your time. So again, it's being that strategic approach to grants. And I actually don't know the solution to that, but it's about not putting all your eggs in one basket, I guess. You've got to think, is this grant worth doing and applying for? And it's not about always winning them, because as we've talked about, there's very low success rates. It's about, is this a project that you're going to keep going? Because even if you do get you aren't successful, is it something you will still invest time in to reshape?
Yes.
And go again, because then it's worth it, right? Like if you've started it, sometimes grant applications for me are a starting process. I've got a deadline. Even if I probably not going to be perfect, at least I've got something going that I can keep working on for next round. So yeah, I don't know if that's particularly helpful, but I guess that's kind of been my approach. And, you know, every time I start to doubt myself, I keep reminding myself I've managed to fund myself and my research for over 15 years now. And okay, maybe this is my one piece of advice, actually. It's about getting comfortable with the uncertainty. And I struggled for many years about that, the uncertainty of sort of career trajectory. And at one point, I kind of realized, you know what? No matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. I'll figure it out. And I think that allowed me to accept the uncertainty a lot more. And yes, it sometimes means you're at the 11th hour going, oh no, what am I doing next year? But somehow it does, for me, I've managed to pursue this and keep going. And I'm just like, no matter what happens, I'll figure out you'll be okay. And that's kind of helped me stress a bit less about sort of the turbulence that is the funding cycles. So maybe that's my advice. Sorry, I rambled a bit then.
No, I mean, that's a very nice, that's a really nice point to end on. And perhaps I'll attempt to summarize some of the key points from the discussion, and perhaps starting with that uncertainty, because a lot of what you've talked about does speak to the uncertainty of the, you know, being a researcher, the funding environment that, you know, that I guess we have to live with. So you've talked about, both of you talked about being opportunistic, that it's not necessarily about the size of the grant or the prestige of the funding source, but more about what fits with your, you know, what you're wanting to achieve, whether there's a good fit between what the grant is looking for and what you're trying to do. That keep an open mind for what, you know, what opportunity might suit. At the same time, there is you've heard from both our panelists that there is a natural organic growth in both how your research and how you think about yourself, how you're selling your research, how you're selling yourself as a researcher, and that's just a natural progression over a career. Don't be too hard on yourself. We heard about that 10%. If you're probably having to apply for 10 grants to get one. And that's, you know, that is a good benchmark for success if you're meeting or exceeding that. There is a decision-making process where it makes sense to review or think about the chances of success for this particular scheme relative to, you know, your track record. At the same time, we've heard that it doesn't necessarily mean that because you're not competitive right now that you can't look for opportunities to do some work, to apply for funding, perhaps smaller amounts of funding where you can improve your outputs that will make you more competitive for that particular scheme. So continue to have a go, but at the same time, be open to other sources of funding at different levels of value that can help you improve your outputs and track record for a particular grant scheme. In terms of tips for success, think about not just you, but your team, whether you're at the top of that pyramid or you're someone that's working with more senior researchers as part of a team. So think about a team holistically and be open to advice and feedback about your work, how you can make it better, and also how you can seek advice and feedback in order to kind of sell yourself more effectively, as that's something that we often find difficult to do. So I'll open it up to perhaps one or two questions as we are tight with time.
It looks like there's a question in the Q&A.
Let me have a look. Okay. Do you have advice on how to identify diversified funding sources when the research topic is not a major funding priority. That's a really good question.
Very good question. That's something I often ask myself. So Auntie Kerry, you might have better answers. I think a couple of, the easy approach that I've done in the past is I kind of go, this is a topic. Let me see if some of the societies or organizations related to, my work's very patient facing. So, go to those organizations, see if they do offer small grants or not. I have in the past approached some directly, and this is more about implementation of tools, but I've said, look, I really want to roll this out. I don't have funding. Can you throw some money at this problem? And have been able to get some small pots of money to do that. Of late, I've been thinking a lot about philanthropic money and how we might be able to do that. And I think my approach for that will be reaching out to the advancement teams at the uni and saying, actually, can you assist with this? Is there a way that, there's arms at universities that are really focused on philanthropy? So maybe there's an opportunity there, but I guess I haven't actually done that yet. So I don't really have advice on that. Auntie Kerry?
Just as an example, and I hate saying but I had a meeting with 23 AMSs that we worked with in a different position, and I was asking them, what did you want in the medical curriculum, and also what were some of the issues. And there was a young Indigenous social worker who said, I have 14 people with eating disorders. There's nothing that I can do for them. And so that started, I was really devastated, because who would have thought of that? It was never something that was in our kit of skills that we could help anybody with, other than the usual things. So I started working with other networks, with other people, etc., and we found that this was a really big issue. And so now if you look on our website, you'll see videos made for people, how people can help, blah, 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 etc., which will then, of course, leads to more funding success and more funding opportunities. So if you're really interested in something, there will be networks around that you can join, and you may want to join them in their funding applications. But even if you don't, then you will be validated by whatever it is that you're interested in. And networking is a really, really important part of succeeding in any career in academia, because you've got issues around, what is it, imposter syndrome, where you think, what am I doing here? I don't really know anything. And as well as academic loneliness, because you think you're the only one in this sphere who's even interested in this particular topic. So that would be my advice. It's really good that you're interested in something that is peculiar, and I mean that in a small p, different way of being and thinking, but there will be others out there who you can really link up with and eat cake with. I might be having a bit of a hype out at the moment, thinking.
No, that's so helpful. And I hope for the people listening today that the take-home message is that there is more to funding than Category 1 funding. In reality, while we will always aspire to be successful with those prestigious sources of funding, as you've heard from our two panelists, over a career, you must be flexible and agile, follow your passions, use your networks, talk to funders, and that you will be okay. Quoting Michelle, you will likely be okay. It's not a straightforward path. But there are a lot of different opportunities out there. Keep your eyes open, talk to people, get advice from your mentors and people that have walked the path before you. And, everybody's path is different. There's no one path to success. And we really want to encourage you to explore opportunities that suit what you're trying to do that suit your particular skills and interests. And yeah, reach out to the amazing network of women researchers that you have around you for advice. We're only too happy to support you and have a chat over a cup of tea or coffee to, you know, brainstorm some ideas that might work for you.
Can I also say, just I thought about it. I've watched my colleagues do this, and I'm starting to do this too. If anyone asks you to contribute to their project, make sure you ask for money for yourself as well. You know, I think a lot of in my earlier career, I never did. I'd be like, yeah, I'll be on your grant, and I'll ask nothing from you. And I, you know, the last few grants I've submitted, people have said, no, I need my time reimbursed if I'm going to work on this. So I've started doing that too. And I think that's actually really smart, you know, and because, yeah, it might mean that you're pulling together bits of money from all over the place, small bits, but still bringing in money to get the work done. And so that don't be afraid to ask. As someone said to me, the worst thing someone can say is no. And you can still be on it and still be involved. You're, oh, well, I won't get funding. But, you know, if you ask, you might actually get the answers like, sure, I'll build that into the budget. So yes, ask.
Great tip, Michelle. That is a really excellent tip. Any final thoughts from you, Auntie Kerry?
No, I think it's, I guess so. Is that be kind to yourself and remember that you're only one, but you are one, and make sure that what you're doing is the right thing for you.
That's a wonderful message to end on. So I would like to wrap up this WHRTN webinar and thank our panelists very much for sharing your wisdom and advice to the EMCR audience today.